Mr. Vince, besides being a member of the European Parliament, you're also the president of FUEM, the Federal Union of European Nationalities. What is the mission and purpose of FUEM?
Our umbrella organization of national minorities and language groups in Europe has been created in 1949 in Paris, so it's a 70-year-old organization, which, of course, at the beginnings was created by the regional language groups in order to promote together their interests. But after the fall of the Iron Curtain, especially, many Central and Eastern European minority organizations become part of the FUEM. And when the Soviet Union broke up, then also groups from the former Soviet states are now members of the Federal Union of European Nationalities. Our goal is to represent the interest of our members at bilateral level with their host country, at regional level, and also at European level. And today we are observer members of the Council of Europe. We work together with the OSCE, with the UN, and of course we have a tight relationship with the European Union as well. For example, if we are looking from an EU or European perspective, the minority rights are the subject of the member states' competence. So each country is responsible how they treat their minorities and what is the legislative framework that they prepare for the groups living on their territory. But from this point of view, Europe is very different. There are good examples, countries that do a lot for their minorities, and they also take care of the own nationals that are abroad in autochthonous minority communities. I would say here, for example, the Danish-German border region is such a good example with a framework that enabled a good cooperation between the two countries and between the minorities on each side of the border. But we have still countries like Greece or France that don't even recognize the minority groups living on their territory, so we cannot speak about a uniform standard of minority rights protection at a European level, and we are working for that together in a solidar way. We have our main office headquarters in Flensburg, but then we have offices in Berlin and Brussels as well, to be as close as possible to the decision making processes, to be able to influence them. It is important to say that we represent the traditional minorities or autochthonous minorities, as we call them, so groups that have been for generations on a territory in a region, and maybe sometimes the borders shifted above their heads, but they were living there for generations, and they are now in a minority position in relation with the majority language and culture of their country.
If I ask you to define the small minority groups in the EU, who are they? Is there a criteria that determines minorities?
There is not a standard explanation or a term that comprises all the groups, because even the national law is different. In some countries they are called national minorities. In other countries they are called Volksgruppe. In others are called nationalities. In others they are recognized as groups of people belonging to a minority. So it is not. There is no universal definition of minorities.
Do you consider refugees and immigrants as minorities?
No, because they were not living for generations on the same territory. So that is maybe the most important characteristic of our groups, that they were living for generations on that territory, and they belong to the European culture, the European linguistic and cultural heritage, and thus they are, Europeans by definition. And this is different from what the new minorities mean today.
But if we
look
if we look at immigration in Europe, it is something that started around 80, 90 years ago. So didn't these immigrants somehow belong to the European culture?
They are a new part of the European culture, of course, but it is a bit different when groups have lived for generations on the same territory. They created a built heritage. They created art of work. They have intellectuals that were part of the European, all intellectual circles. And the new groups that have a very important addition to the European culture, but still it's something new that has been added in the last decade.
What is FUEM doing to secure equal rights for minority groups towards education and job market, for instance?
Yes, that is the main role of the FUEM as minority organization, how we can secure for people from these linguistic groups to have the same right as the majority to access culture, education, to be able to use their own language in the relationship with the public administration and so on. And for that, we believe it would be important to create a European standard of minority rights. And that is how our initiative, the European Citizens Initiative, has born the Minority Safe Pack, which was created 8 years ago, and more than 1 million people signed for it, so that the European Union prepares legal acts in the protection of minorities. Because we believe it should not be a matter of where you were born to have better rights. So, like you were born German in Denmark, then you have good rights. If you happen to be Turkish in Greece, then you have no rights. And it should not be like that, because all communities and all people should be equal and benefit from the same rights. But it is also up to the international organizations such as the European Union to provide this standard. So that is what the FUEM is trying to do by many meetings, conferences, and this big project that is the Citizens.
Mr. Vince, do you believe that in Europe today we do have a successful integration policy?
What integration means, that would be the question.
Well, integration means that people who are living under the umbrella of the societies and communities and the European states are part of those communities. They contribute and they have their rights, their equal rights. Do you believe we have such a successful integration policy?
Well, I give back the question because it really depends on the different groups that we are speaking about. I believe that the autonomous minority groups are well integrated. Then we have the other group of the new minorities. In some countries it was a success, in other countries it was not such a good success. Then we have a third group of intra-EU mobility and the movement of people. For example, Polish people who moved in Germany, they are quite a big group now, and you can start wondering if their integration has been successful. So we have to look differently. Regarding the ethnic groups, our groups, I believe this integration was more successful in the countries which started a good dialogue with the minorities, which were able to adapt a good legislative framework that gave rights to these communities, where the state was reluctant in helping the minority groups. There, the loyalty between the minority and the majority has not been formed yet. And it's an ongoing process. And I'm looking at Central Eastern Europe, where just 30 years ago, there was a war in the Western Balkans that started from ethnic cleansing between the different nationalities. And not everything has been yet settled in that framework. So there's a lot to do. The most important is to keep up the dialogue between the majority and minority.
Yes, talking about dialogue, you called at a certain point for an open dialogue between majority and minority in Europe. On what premises should such dialogue materialize?
I think the starting point has to be a need from the side of the minority, that we are ready for this dialogue. But then it always depends on the majority, that they are ready to come, to listen, and be able to make decisions. The decisions regarding the minority groups are always made by the majority. It is the national parliament where always the majority parties are in majority, and they have to support the minority claims. If they refuse to do that, then the dialogue is not effective. There is a dialogue, we can discuss a lot during conferences, but if there is no legislative act afterwards, then it is something that did not achieve its goal. And I am looking always at the good examples from this point of view, like Italy, where in the South Tyrol region, after a very strong cleansing between the majority and the minority in the 60s, they found a good solution with the autonomous rights that were given to the South Tyrol region. And since that, we can witness a very strong economic development, cultural development, where the majority and the local minority, which are the Italians, are happy with the status they have, with the living conditions, and with the cultural rights they possess. So these are the good examples how the dialogue should be carried. But for example, in Romania, now the dialogue between the Hungarian community, which is more than 6% of the population, and the Romanian majority is not working because the majority refuses to recognize the Hungarians as a group. They are treating us only as individuals, and we don't get rights to administer education and cultural institutions, for example.
Mr. Vincze, do you meet a positive response when working with the European institutes, among them the European Parliament and Commission, when it comes to minorities and minorities' rights?
I believe it is a process, and it has some good outcomes. In the last mandate, we could, for example, see that the European Parliament approved two resolutions that called the European Commission to create legislation in the protection of minorities. So I would say there is a majority in the European Parliament, even in this mandate. But then what is the answer of the European Commission? There, one could say that the previous Commission, the Juncker Commission, did not answer at all at these two resolutions from the European Parliament. The Ursula von der Leyen Commission, she promised, for example, that she will strongly consider the proposals from the Parliament, and that they want to achieve a successful citizens' initiative as well. So I believe from these two sides, the Parliament and the citizens that signed for the Minority Safepack Initiative, 1 million people, will have a positive answer from the Commission. And so far, the signs are positive, and I am working for that. The FUEM is working that this attitude remains positive and that we achieve results.
Mr. Vincze, the EU approved a joint policy in dealing with immigrants and especially with immigration applications. Do you believe that this joint policy is effective and efficient?
Well, I think the European Union and especially the Commission and the Parliament are trying now to set a new framework regarding immigration, refugee status, the famous Dublin regulation, and so on. I believe in the next month we should have tangible results. But of course, because of the coronavirus, now everything is on hold. Any other topic is on hold. But it is a process that brought many important steps. But I am looking for on a different topic, for example, the Roma strategies that were created in 2010. We already can see if this brought to results. And I would say that the results are very modest because in the different states, the situation of the Roma did not improve significantly. So there is need for more joint action and more concrete ways to provide a better framework for the Roma, for example, but it's relevant also for the immigrant groups.
Do you believe that intercultural societies are a benefit for Europe?
Europe has been always a very intertwined society, even in the history. The different cultures mixed, and the very famous universities from Western Europe were attracting scholars from Eastern Europe, and when they went home, they brought with them a very important knowledge. So this mixing of European culture is a reality. This should not be denied. It should be used as a benefit because the European cultures and languages should be protected by all. How the integration of third country cultures and languages influences our European culture, some say European way of life, that's a different topic. Here we have good experiences and some bad experiences. I'm referring to bad experiences when parallel societies were created in big cities, which really did not integrate in the majority culture or majority language. So we need to tackle, and it is a long process that has to provide better answers.
What are your future plans in FUEM?
Well, I think our biggest project, the Citizens Initiative, should be brought to a success. And once we do that, then we can follow up and look for other important tasks to carry on. But we have a very intense activity. We have our language groups inside. For example, the German group, the Slavic group, the Turkish group that have their own activity. We have a strong cooperation of the minority regions from all across Europe. We have a project for the Western Balkans. We have one for the Caucasus region. We are very close. We are following very closely what is happening in Ukraine on the minority issues. We have also football championship, the Europa-Nævnet, the football championship of minority groups. We had to postpone it, unfortunately, so it will take place next year. But we have a very broad activity, and I'm happy to say that FUEM has more than 100 member organizations, and we provide them good services, I believe.
Mr. Vince, I have an off-topic question due to the current situation. Do you consider the coronavirus a serious threat to the European economy? And are you satisfied so far with the way the EU, local governments, and EU institutes are dealing with the crisis?
Yes, I believe it's a very serious threat because we look at the spread of the virus, and it is very worrisome. It changes a bit our activity and our way of life. Now, the answer that the national authorities provide, I think that is the most important. So they carry the most important task to do the national regulation and different preventive measures, because what we are doing now is to prevent the very strong spreading of this virus. Many people will get infected, but it is very important that in time this takes a longer time, and there is no peak when really the health systems cannot provide proper care for the sick people. And from this point of view, I would say that we learned from the China and the Italian measures. Also, the European Union now provided the first important steps in economic. I believe all the signs of an economic crisis are met today, and more the activity and industrial production will slow down or will stop, the bigger the problem will be. And for that, we need solid direction. We need very strong investment. It is not a surprise that the European institutions call for loans for companies, because if we don't save now the companies that are in difficulties, they will need to put people on leave, or they will have to what's the word? The unemployment will rise, and this will create very strong economic and social problems in the upcoming months.
Mr. Lóránt Vincze, it was a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks a lot, and all the best to you.